Hello everyone, and welcome to the Unanswered Questions True Crime Podcast.
I have spent hours and hours investigating this.
He basically told her that people have been killed. Journalists, independent investigators, people like that disappeared. It frightened her to the bone.
There's more to the story than meets the eye.
There were rumors of torture and homicide and sexual abuse, all sorts of egregious, horrendous crimes.
He was polygraphed 3 times. Each of those 3 showed evasions.
His resumes were a skeleton of truth.
He was mad at the world, and particularly mad at the government.
The study that he commissioned described a fictional terrorist attack.
If people have died over this, it means you're getting close to the truth.
You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to say, what the fuck?
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of my new podcast, Unanswered Questions, where every week we'll endeavour to discuss a mysterious unsolved case that has many lingering unanswered questions. So I hope you enjoy, and as always, leave me some feedback on what you think about the show, and rate it as well. Now on to the show. This week we'll be talking about the many lies that Hulk Hogan, the infamous wrestler, has told over the years. Now, Hulk Hogan remains one of the most popular pro wrestlers in the world of professional wrestling, with his influence in the business never being understated. However, his troubled past concerning racism has ultimately led to his downfall. Even though Hogan has been in and around the wrestling business, he's been known to stretch the truth once in a while. So today, we're going to get into a few of the lies that he's told over the years. To start off with, Hulk Hogan was booed at WrestleMania 37 when he was introduced with Titus O'Neil as the host of the pay-per-view, which all stemmed from him using racial slurs in a leaked 2015 sex tape. The Wrestler was a critically acclaimed movie from 2008. It won the Golden Lion Award at the 65th Venice International Film Festival, and lead actor Mickey Rourke won a BAFTA Award, a Golden Globe Award, an Independent Spirit Award, and even got an Oscar nomination for Best Actor for his performance in the movie. However, according to Hulk Hogan on the Howard Stern show, he was offered Mickey Rourke's lead role 3 times. Reiterating the claims to Digital Spy, Hogan said, quote, "When the script for The Wrestler kept coming to me, I said, this movie is so good. If you put me in the film as a wrestler, people are going to say, no credibility. Hulk Hogan isn't a good actor. Whatever Hollywood thinks of me." End quote. If Hogan is to be believed, he gave up the lead role to ensure the success of the movie. I mean, what an honest and humble act. It's a shame it doesn't appear to be true. Award-winning director of The Wrestler, Darren Aronofsky, shot down Hogan's claims on Twitter, tweeting, quote, "For the record, the role of the wrestler was always at Mickey Rourke. It was never Hulk Hogan's, as he claims on at Howard Stern." End quote. He was an all-state pitcher in high school, and that he was scouted by both the New York Yankees and the Cincinnati Reds, but an injury prevented him from signing with either team. In his autobiography, Hollywood Hulk Hogan claims that he was a fat kid in his youth, but still goes on to brag about his legendary feats of athleticism. Hogan claims to have batted an unheard of 714 in the Little League World Series. Hogan says that while he wasn't the most athletic baseball player ever, he still had plenty of pure power and established himself as a home run hitter. He says his performance for West Tampa Little League put him on the map, and talent scouts from the New York Yankees and Cincinnati Reds came to see him play. Hogan's apparently impressive baseball career, however, got cut short because of injury. As he told Mercury News, quote, "As I threw underhanded to first base, I broke my arm. My arm was never the same." End quote. It all sounds pretty impressive, but is it true? Well, apparently not. The Little League website has no record of Hogan's unheard of accomplishment. Not only that, it has no record of a young Terry Bollea even playing in the Little League World Series. Hogan claims he's the one who first noticed Kevin Owens' potential. Quote, "Well, I hate to brag about it, but I'm the first one to point the finger at Kevin Owens," end quote, after a decade of solid work in the Indies. In 2015, while speaking with Radio Yorkshire, Hulk Hogan made the bizarre claim, quote, that he was the first person to see Kevin Owens as the guy. Hogan said, quote, "Well, I hate to brag about it, but I'm the first one to point the finger at Kevin Owens. I saw him on NXT, like his second match, and saw him just drop and beat and grind and beating this guy down and doing it the old school way and really understanding how to get heat, doing it the old school way, and I said, that's the guy. I said, that's the guy. I don't care if he looks like a wrestler or looks like an ice cream salesman. I don't care. That's the guy." End quote. While it's nice to see that Hogan saw potential in Kevin Owens, who has gone on to become a huge name in WWE, his statement is ludicrous. Kevin Owens began wrestling in 2000, years before this interview. During that time, Owens had a very successful independent wrestling career and had built a cult following among fans. Many people had seen the potential in Kevin Owens before 2015. Not to mention, Hogan is talking about a Kevin Owens match he saw in NXT. If Hogan was the first person to spot Owens, how did Owens even get into NXT in the first place? Hogan starred in Mr. Nanny and Santa with Muscles. Hogan claims he rewrote both scripts entirely, only to have his writing credits stolen from him by the Dastardly Writers Guild. In his first autobiography, Hulk Hogan claims that he and Vince McMahon found the first script of their movie No Holds Barred to be completely unacceptable. In Hollywood Hulk Hogan, Hogan says he and McMahon locked themselves away in a Florida hotel room for 3 days and rewrote the entire script from scratch. Hogan even goes into detail of finding inspiration for the cinematic fight of the movie while sitting on the toilet. Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon are credited as executive producers for No Holds Barred, but are not credited as writers. Writing credit goes to Dennis Hatkin. It's also debatable whether Hogan and McMahon would have even had time for a 3-day hotel room writing excursion in the late 80s, as both men would have been extremely busy. Hogan has also claimed he rewrote scripts on 2 other movies he starred in, that being Mr. Nanny and Santa with Muscles, and blames the Writers Guild for blocking his writing credit. No Holds Barred, Mr. Nanny and Santa with Muscles were not very well written, though it's doubtful Hogan had anything to do with that. The bad acting in those movies, though, is definitely his fault. Hogan says he's the first one to slam Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3 and that the Giant weighed 600 pounds and Andre would pass away a few days after said slam, which in turn tore 18 muscles in his back. Andre has been slammed before, he wasn't near 600 pounds and Andre would live for years after, not days. He outdrank John Belushi in LA years after Belushi died. According to this, Hogan says that he went out hard partying after WrestleMania 2 and that he drank John Belushi under the table. The problem with that is Belushi died in 1982 and WrestleMania 2 took place in 1986. Hulk Hogan once claimed that he was asked to join a startup company known as UFC. While UFC wasn't nearly as popular as it is today, Hogan said he wouldn't join because guys get beat up when the fight should be stopped. Hulk Hogan did claim that back in his heyday he wrestled in 400 days in 1 year. Hogan claimed that since he travelled so frequently between the United States and Japan, the time difference made the 400 days a possibility. In his second autobiography, My Life Outside the Ring, Hogan made this outlandish claim that he once wrestled 400 days in 1 year. Because of the time difference flying back and forth from Japan, Hogan claims his years were longer than 365 days. Hogan said, quote, "If I say I wrestled 400 days a year, it's no exaggeration. My years were actually longer than 365 days. There were times when I'd fly back and forth to Japan twice a week just to wrestle. Now, it was nothing to wrestle in Madison Square Garden one day and then fly all the way to Ig Dome in Tokyo the same day, because you'd gain 14 hours and then fly back to the West Coast and so on. So I could wrestle in Japan today and then fly back across the international date line and land in another town yesterday. But I was constantly adding days to my years." End quote. That absolutely sounds batshit crazy logic to me, but anyway. First of all, there are certainly no records of him wrestling in Madison Square Garden one day and then the Egg Dome the day after. Second of all, even if he did do that, he wouldn't have gained 14 hours as he said he would. He would have actually lost 14 hours. And Hogan's claim of wrestling 400 days a year isn't just baffling, it's mathematically impossible. Hogan once said that he used to fight Pride Fighters in the 70s. Pride Fighting Championships was founded in 1997. So there's no way that he possibly could have. In 2011, Hulk Hogan appeared on Boomer and Carton via ProWrestling.net to promote his Bound for Glory match with Sting. When the host asked Hogan if he had any interest in MMA, Hogan said he did have some experience while wrestling in Japan. Hogan said he fought a lot of Pride Fighters during this time in Japan in 1977, and that whenever he had a wrestling match in Japan, he never knew if he was getting into the ring with a shooter. There are a number of issues with this claim, however. Pride, a Japanese MMA company, was first established in 1997, 20 years after Hogan's claim of 1977. Secondly, Hogan's first tour of Japan happened in 1980. He was never even in Japan in 1977. It is possible Hogan had trained with MMA fighters in Japan and was erroneously calling them Pride Fighters, but his claims are still highly exaggerated and don't make sense. Hogan claims he was touched by a Make-A-Wish kid so much he personally invited the kid to come see him at SummerSlam 92. When he went out, the seat was empty and Hogan knew he was gone. Touched by the Hulk story, he recorded a song about him, including the line, quote, "I guess there will be an empty seat when I wrestle at Wembley," end quote. Problem? Well, he wasn't on that card and never wrestled in Wembley until after WCW, proving the entire thing is a lie. While he was in WCW, Hogan said that a pay-per-view bout between himself and Mike Tyson was supposed to commence. Hogan's excuse as to why it didn't happen, quote, "Tyson was too scared," end quote, which I don't believe at all. George Foreman grill. Now this is an interesting one. Hogan claimed on an episode of Hogan Knows Best that the reason he didn't get the offer was because he was out picking up his kids from school, and this is a well-known story, this one. Hulk Hogan has told the story many times that he passed on the opportunity to endorse what would become the George Foreman grill. Telling the story on Hogan Knows Best, Hogan says he missed a phone call as he was picking up his kids from school, and while he was away from the phone, the grill was offered to George Foreman instead. Hogan told the story of getting the phone call on his reality show, quote, "I come home and hit the old school voicemail recorder and he says, 'Hey Hulk, this is Sam Perlmutter. I have a grill and I have a blender and I go call you and George Foreman to see who wants it.' I wasn't there to answer the call, so when I called Sam back, he said George had taken the grill. $550 million later, George got the lean, mean grillin' machine," end quote. However, the true origins of the George Foreman grill has no Hulk Hogan in sight. The designer of the grill had connections to George Foreman through an attorney named Sam Perlmutter, the same guy Hogan talked about. Perlmutter showed the grill to Foreman, who agreed to endorse the grill after his wife made him a hamburger on it. Foreman said, quote, "I like it, I tried it, and it works. Let's do it," end quote. And the rest, as they say, is history. Hulk Hogan was never in consideration for the George Foreman grill. Hulk Hogan once said that he was supposed to play and even got approached to play bass for Metallica and Rolling Stones. The bands have actually refuted this many times, however. Speaking with newspaper The Sun via Loudwire, Hogan said this on the subject, quote, "I used to be a session musician before I was a wrestler. I played bass guitar. I was big pals with Lars Ulrich," sorry if I get that name wrong, "and he asked me if I wanted to play bass with Metallica in the early days, but it didn't work out," end quote. This is a hell of a claim. Metallica are one of the biggest heavy metal bands of all time. Again, though, Hulk Hogan seems to be lying. Lars Ulrich, sorry if I get that name wrong, co-founder of Metallica, says none of it's true, and that he doesn't even know who Hulk Hogan is. During an interview on the Howard Stern show via Blabbermouth, Ulrich said, quote, "I don't know Hulk Hogan. I don't know enough about him. I'm not a huge wrestling fan. I certainly have no recollection of doing anything with Hulk Hogan. That one I was scratching my head on that one too." End quote. In the face of outright denial from Ulrich, Hogan walked back slightly on the Metallica claims on Talk Is Jericho. Hogan told the story to Chris Jericho that he merely sent a video audition of his bass playing to Metallica, but never heard back from them, which is certainly a big change from being pals with the founder of the band. Hogan says Elvis was a Hulkamaniac. Elvis, while a known wrestling fan, was gone before Hulk Hogan even existed, so how could he be a Hulkamaniac if he was dead before it even became a thing? Says Harley Race came to the arena with a gun and set the ring on fire and asked Hogan for a job. Hulk Hogan once claimed, "I'm not a steroid abuser and do not use steroids." Now this is another one of the big lies about Hulk Hogan. In 1991 on the Arsenio Hall show, sorry if I get that name wrong, Hulk Hogan flat out denied ever abusing steroids. Hogan would go back on this claim 3 years later during the 1994 Vince McMahon steroid trial, which I'm going to cover in another episode of this podcast, where he claimed he had taken steroids before but had stopped taking them in 1990. This could be somewhat believable as in the early 90s, since Hulk Hogan was visibly skinnier, he used to be, although he obviously was still in better shape than most. Hogan has since opened up more about his steroid use, saying a lot of it was doctor prescribed. In his first autobiography, Hogan goes in depth on the topic, though in his book he sometimes spells it incorrectly as STERIODS when it's actually supposed to be STDROIDS. Hogan said, quote, "At that time, every wrestler I knew was taking part in steroid use in the WWE. They were part of my generation. I'm not making excuses, but they were everywhere. And a lot of that had to do with what we knew about them, which obviously wasn't enough. The most commonly prescribed were testosterone, decadobolin, and dianabol. I never had a question about whether I would take them. It was part of my daily regime. Did you take a shower? Yeah. Did you brush your teeth? Yeah. Did you take your steroids? Yeah. That was the deal. It was how I lived, end quote. Almost got Undertaker blacklisted, claiming the tombstone he took broke Hogan's neck and was laying on Vince's office floor, really milking it and jeopardizing a young rookie taker's career. The replay shows Hogan's head was nowhere near making contact. Then he claims, quote, "Oh well, you had such a tight grip on me that it pulled my neck rather than the impact, brother," end quote. In his two autobiographies, Hogan spoke about the match which he had with The Undertaker at Survivor Series of 1991. In the match, The Undertaker hit Hogan with a tombstone piledriver on a steel chair. This is how Hulk Hogan describes the event in My Life Outside of the Ring, his second autobiography. Quote, "The Undertaker grabbed me again and flipped me over and dropped my head on the steel chair in the nastiest tombstone of all tombstones. When he dropped that tombstone on me, my skull made contact with the chair. The jolt of the whole move threw my neck out. My neck, calves, shoulders, biceps, triceps, forearms. Everything went numb," end quote. Now, The Undertaker, just 24 years old at the time, panicked as he ran to the back, thinking he had just injured the biggest wrestling star of all time. Hogan complained that the piledriver had messed up his neck, and in the years since has said that the tombstone had given him permanent neck issues. Looking back at the footage of the match, however, Hogan's head doesn't come close to touching the chair below him, and The Undertaker performed the move as safely as possible. Hogan has since changed his story a few times over the years, saying maybe it was Undertaker's knee that jammed his neck. The images still say otherwise, and Hogan's neck was nowhere close to any danger. Hulk Hogan claimed that Buster Douglas didn't want to get in the ring with him. Buster Douglas knocked out Mike Tyson to score one of the biggest upsets in sports history, but he never wanted to get in the ring with Hulk Hogan. Yeah, that's what the Hulkster told Joe Rogan on his podcast. Well, long story short, Vince McMahon was trying to set up a match between Hogan and Tyson. Per Hogan, McMahon assured him that Tyson would not lock Hogan in an armbar or flip the script. Hogan even suggesting that Iron Man Mike would be remotely scared of him might be the biggest stretching of the truth. Hogan claimed that he and Antonio Inoki had a match in Japan where Hogan beat him up so badly he died, but he got brought back to life via CPR after the match. But Hulk couldn't work in Japan for a while after because the Yakuza were after him. He fought George Foreman in a charity boxer versus wrestler match. He only invoked his creative control clause one time in WCW, which is a load of bullshit. He came up with the idea for the NWO, but he wanted it to be him, Booty Man, and the Nasty Boys. Rock broke all of his ribs with the rock bottom at WrestleMania 18. Rock wanted to stop the match, but Hogan told him to pick him back up and hit him again. He claimed his black eye at WrestleMania 9 was caused by a jet ski accident. A lot of people suspected Savage punched him out because of something to do with Elizabeth, his wife at the time. Kanyon would call him and talk about his struggles with depression and his sexuality. He sat next to Kerry Von Erich on a flight to Japan 72 hours before Kerry killed himself. In 1993, Kerry Von Erich learned that he had been indicted on drug possession charges stemming from an arrest a month earlier. Kerry was already on a 10-year probation for another charge and was facing serious jail time. Tragically, Kerry Von Erich took his own life at his father's ranch in Dallas at just 33 years of age on February 18th of 1993. Strangely, Hulk Hogan claimed in his autobiography Hollywood Hulk Hogan to have been on a flight to Japan with Kerry Von Erich just 72 hours before Kerry Von Erich died. This is strange on a couple of fronts. First, there are no records of Kerry going to or coming from Japan in the days before his death, with his last match in Japan happening 7 months earlier. Second, with the charges he was facing, Kerry was unlikely to have been away from home. What's even stranger is there are no records of Hulk Hogan ever being in Japan around that time. He would have some matches in Japan in late 1993, but nothing in February as he claims. Maybe Hogan is misremembering a date, since it's very likely Hogan and Von Erich shared flights to Japan in the past. However, specifically saying it was 72 hours before his death is unquestionably false. He was the first one to tell Brett that Owen had died. He used to sweat so much that Vince would buy him 10 replacement belts per month during his world title reign. He was the wrestler responsible for the WWF first selling merchandise. He had to talk Vince into it. He was the first wrestler to use entrance music. Gorgeous George had an entrance music in the 1950s, and he probably wasn't the first to do it. In 1982, Hulk Hogan appeared in the movie Rocky III as the character of Thunderlips. Using the movie as inspiration, Hulk Hogan started coming out for his matches to Eye of the Tiger, the theme song to Rocky III. Hogan even made his entrance at the first WrestleMania using Eye of the Tiger. In his autobiography, Hollywood Hulk Hogan, Hogan claimed that he was the first person to ever use entrance music in wrestling, something that would have become a staple in the modern day sport. This simply isn't true at all. There are many instances of entrance music being used in wrestling before Hogan. For example, Gorgeous George is often credited as the first person to use entrance music. Way back in the 40s and 50s, Gorgeous George used Sir Edward Elgar's Pomp and Circumstance as he would gracefully enter the ring. World Class Championship Wrestling was also using entrance music in the 70s and was the first company to give every single wrestler unique tracks. Therefore, Hulk Hogan was far from the first wrestler to use entrance music as he claims. Hogan was banned from Letterman because he stopped Letterman from hitting on a pregnant Linda McMahon or Linda Hogan. Hogan has appeared on Letterman many times. Hogan's movies were more successful than Rock's. His match with Andre sold out Shea Stadium, not Bruno versus, and I'm going to butcher this name, Zybisco. He wanted Sting to come to the WWF after WrestleMania 3 so that Sting could beat him and Hogan could turn heel. He used to be 6'9", but now after his back and knee surgeries, he's only 6'4". He was going to commit suicide, literally had the gun in his hand pointed at his head when he got a call from Lalia Ali that he took as a sign he should keep trying to live. In 1998, he said he was going to run for president in the 2000 election. Fujinami tried to shoot on him in Japan and steal the WWF title, but he beat him. He wanted to turn heel on Warrior at WrestleMania 6, but Vince wouldn't go for it. He wanted to drop the title to Piper in 1985, but he didn't think Piper would be willing to lose it back to him. Vern Gange got Nick Bockenwinkle to shoot on him during one of their AWA title matches. Hogan shot back and won the fight. Vince told Kurt Angle to stiff Hogan during their matches in 2002. Hogan created the entire Macho Man gimmick and look for Randy Savage. And the last incredible lie that Hogan told was Hogan was about to retire from wrestling until Terry Funk, who morphed into Jack and Jerry Briscoe in later versions of the story, persuaded him to come back. How many of these stories are lies and how many of them are true? Well, all I can say is that Hulk Hogan has told a lot of lies over his career. With that, this case remains open, but with many unanswered questions that still remain unanswered. Please rate the show and let me know what you guys think about this and the many other cases I've covered. You can follow me on all major social media platforms, YouTube, BitChute, Dailymotion. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram. Links are all down below in the description. If you have a case you'd like me to have a look at, don't hesitate to send me a message. I'm your host, and this has been the Unanswered Questions Podcast. Until next time. Next on Unanswered Questions. In the earlier morning hours of March 18th, 1990, 13 works of art were stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston.